Good morning, class. We are finishing up our lecture. Come on. There we go. We are finishing up our lecture for today. The first half was on President Zachary Taylor, and our second half is the Compromise of 1850. The issue of California statehood caused fire eaters in the South to voice threats of secession. The crisis brought into the Congressional Forum the most distinguished assemblage of statesmen since the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The immortal trio of Clay, Calhoun, and Webster. They appeared together for the last time on the public stage. Henry Clay, now 73 years of age, plays a crucial role. He proposes and skillfully defends a series of compromises. He is struggling with tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was a rather, unfortunately, common disease back then. He was ably assisted by 37-year-old Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois. And here you have artist's conception of Henry Clay, 73 years old, the great compromiser, Harry of the West, and Senator Douglas, 5'4", the little giant from the state of Illinois. Now, Stephen A. Douglas will later, in 1860, go up against Abraham Lincoln for the presidency, and there will be almost a foot difference in height between the two of them. Yes, Douglas, 5'4", the little giant, he was known as. And Clay, Calhoun over here in a seated position, and Daniel Webster over here also in a seated position. So the immortal trio, Clay from the South, Calhoun from the South, Clay from the West, the great compromiser, and Daniel Webster from the North. Clay urged with all of his persuasiveness that North and South both make concessions. Senator John C. Calhoun, South Carolina, hotbed of agitation, also dying of tuberculosis. He would die 3 weeks later. He championed the South in his last formal speech. Too weak to deliver it himself, he sat while a younger colleague read his fateful words. His impassioned plea was to leave slavery alone, return runaway slaves, give the South its rights as a minority, and restore the political balance. He had in mind, as was later revealed, an utterly unworkable scheme of electing 2 presidents, one from the North and one from the South. Each would hold veto power. Calhoun died in 1850 before the debate was over, uttering the sad words, "The South, the South, God knows what will become of her." I hope that on my deathbed, politics is not the last thing on my mind. My God, I hope. My family, I hope. Something other than politics. Well, Daniel Webster upheld Clay's compromise measures in his last great speech, a 3-hour effort. now 68, and suffering from a liver complaint aggravated by high living. Liver complaint aggravated by high living. Sounds like cirrhosis of the liver. Sounds like a little too much imbibing of the alcohol. So here we've got Clay and Calhoun dying of tuberculosis, and Daniel Webster here with cirrhosis of the liver. He had lost some of the fire of his magnificent voice, but Webster, speaking deliberately and before overflowing galleries. Anyone can come into the galleries and listen or watch what is taking place on the floor of the Senate. He urged all reasonable concessions to the South, including the new fugitive slave law with teeth. Well, at the height of the controversy in 1850, President Taylor unknowingly helped the cause of concession by dying suddenly, probably of acute intestinal disorder. Portly, round-faced Vice President Millard Fillmore, a colorless and conciliatory New York lawyer politician, now takes over the reins. And he will put through the Compromise of 1850. And what are the main points of that Compromise of 1850? Well, a compromise is when both sides put all their demands on the table and both sides take some of their demands off the table and some of their demands are left on the table. Are both sides completely happy? No. But each side has gained something and each side has lost something. That's why it is a compromise. For the North, California would be admitted as a free state. At this point, we were 15 free, 15 slave, and we were always trying to bring them in two at a time, one slave, one free, to keep the balance in the Senate. In the House, there were more free members than slave, and so the free could always outvote the South. But in the Senate, you have equality, 2 members from each state, and so the Senate could the South could hold their own in the Senate and veto legislation that displeased them. So with California entering, it would now be 16 free states with only 15 slave states. There was no slave state ready to come in. You always wanted to bring them in as pairs. Remember the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise? Missouri wanted to come in as slave. There was no free state at the time, so Maine was taken away from Massachusetts to bring in a free state. So Missouri could come in slave, Maine came in free. Well, California's banging at the door. We need help from the government. Tens of thousands have flooded into California. We need admittance. But there is no slave state. So forever, from this point on, there will not be equality. Oops, that was not supposed to happen. There will not be equality in the Senate. Another concession for the North. Territory disputed by Texas and New Mexico was to be surrendered to New Mexico. Okay. Now, Texas had come in as this size of state. Well, Texas does not continue as that size. As you can see, Texas will get sheared off, and a good portion of Texas gets given to the New Mexico territory. And you're saying, how is that a concession to the North? Well, Texas was a slave state, so all of this territory now went into a territory that is undecided. Texas as a slave state, all of that territory, land, I shouldn't say territory, I should say land. That's what's fouling me up in my mind. All of that land was slave land because it belonged to Texas. Now that it has been taken away from Texas and put into New Mexico territory, that is land taken away from a slave state. Now, can this still come in slave? Yes, but it can also come in free. So it is a concession to the North because land that was slave has been opened up to the possibility of coming in free. And, oops, I went too far. No, where am I going? There we go. So, territory disputed by Texas and New Mexico was to be surrendered to New Mexico. Now, third, abolition of the slave trade, but not slavery itself in the District of Columbia. This is very embarrassing. Foreign dignitaries, people coming to our national capital, and they're in D.C., practically on the steps of the nation's capital. You have the slave trade going on. So, can you still own slaves in D.C.? Yes, they're your property. You may live in Washington, D.C. and own your slaves. But within the limits of Washington, D.C., can the slave trade take place? No, it has to take place outside of Washington, D.C. Those are all concessions, major concessions. There's minor things too, but major concessions to the North. Now, major concessions to the South. The remainder of the Mexican cession area were to be formed into the territories of New Mexico and Utah without restrictions on slavery, hence open to popular sovereignty. And back to our trusty map. So, all of this territory that had been, obviously California's out, they're already asking for admittance. But this territory, which was the Mexican cession, it is now open to popular sovereignty. You get enough slave people in here when your population is enough that you're asking for admittance into the Union. If you vote for slave, you can come in as a slave state. If you vote for free, you can come in as a free state. So now you've got 16 free, 15 slave. You have the opportunity to come in as a slave state. The opportunity's there, the likelihood, no, but the opportunity is there. The further away you get from warm climates with a lot of moisture where you can plant labor-intensive crops, the less likelihood of your needing slave labor. It's too dry and arid out here. There's very little need for slave labor in this area. But there's a chance open to popular sovereignty. Second concession to the South. Texas, who is giving up all that disputed land between New Mexico and themselves, is to receive $10 million in compensation. Texas is a southern state, so a southern state is getting $10 million from the U.S. government. And third, and the greatest benefit of this whole compromise that the South will receive is a more stringent fugitive slave law, going even beyond that of 1793. The North has never been very helpful to the South when their slaves have escaped. Now, the North is required to be very helpful, to join into the hunt in helping the South retrieve their escaped slaves. Is this a solution for the problems between North and South? No, but it is a deferral of the problem. And it is a temporary peace. It will give us peace for 10 years. The Civil War won't take place for another 10 years. The Compromise of 1850. Civil War will break out 1861. And cartoon. Senator Henry, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this, Foote of Mississippi, threatening Senator Thomas Benton with a revolver while debating the Compromise of 1850. Here, he's got a revolver against the other senator. We think all this chaos on the floor of Congress only takes place in foreign countries. Good heavens. I have no idea whether this revolver was even loaded or anything, don't know the details, but the very idea that he would have a gun on the floor of the Senate and would threaten another senator with a gun. This is not the Wild West. This is our legislature meeting. And Zachary Taylor, the man. His wife, Margaret Smith Taylor. Yes, definitely old, rough and ready. Margaret Taylor, his wife. Jefferson Davis was his son-in-law for a brief time period. His first wife is Sarah Taylor, Zachary Taylor's daughter. Unfortunately, she dies 3 months into their marriage, so only very briefly. And Zachary Taylor in Mexico. And General Zachary Taylor with his favorite horse, Whitey. And his huge house on his plantation down in Louisiana. And the monument for 12th President of the United States, General Zachary Taylor, and where he and his wife's caskets are. Yes, General Zachary Taylor, 12th President of the United States. And statue of General Taylor. And inside the little mausoleum here, Zachary Taylor, his years, 1784 to 1850. Yes, dies before the compromise is finalized. And he and his wife's casket. She will pass away 2 years after he does. And some postage stamps, Polk and Zachary Taylor. Yes, that old rough and ready. Zachary Taylor. And we come up next. The signing of the Compromise of 1850. This is obviously an artist's conception because it has Calhoun here, and Calhoun by this time is quite dead. He died 3 weeks after his speech was read for Congress, for the Senate, by a colleague. Daniel Webster is here, and Henry Clay is here. So you've got the immortal trio. And Zachary Taylor, president, is dead as well. I'm thinking this is probably Millard Fillmore. So once again, as the artist, you can put whoever you want in your painting because this is the Compromise of 1850. All of these characters at one stage were involved in the creation and in some part the completion of it. So yes, this is a very valid painting in that. But were they all there for the signing of it? No. Under Millard Fillmore, the compromise is passed. This is not a resolution to the slavery problem, merely a deferral. Who got the better end of the compromise? The answer is clearly the North. California, as a free state, tipped the Senate balance permanently against the South. The territories of New Mexico and Utah were open to slavery on the basis of popular sovereignty, but the laws of nature were in favor of them becoming a free state, not a slave state. Most alarming of all was the new fugitive slave law. This stirred up a storm of opposition in the North. The fleeing slave could not testify in his own behalf, and he was denied a jury trial. These harsh practices threatened to create dangerous precedents for the whites. The federal commissioner who handled the case would receive $5 if the runaway was freed, and $10 if not, an arrangement that strongly resembled a bribe. Freedom-loving Northerners who aided the slave escape were liable for heavy fines and jail sentences. They might even be ordered to join the slave catchers. This possibility rubbed salt into old sores. So savage was this man-stealing law that it touched off an explosive chain reaction in the North. Many shocked moderates, hitherto passive, were driven into the swelling ranks of the abolitionists. Well, I would love to get into the Underground Railroad, but I have run out of my time frame that I promised you. Shorter lecture for today, but I want to remind you, and I'm going to come back and cover her, but I want to remind you, please. I'm coming to it. On D2L, please read the biography of Harriet Tubman and the biography of Sojourner Truth and the biography on Frederick Douglass and Dred Scott. We're going to, in the next week, cover these individuals. So if you could please read those biographies prior to our covering them on D2L, I would sure appreciate it. Thank you so much for your question for attendance for these 2 lectures. This is the easiest assignment yet. All I want you to do is put on your email attendance for today, and that is, what is this today? The 7th? Attendance for 5/7, and you're simply going to write compromise of 1850, because that's what the second lecture was about. No question to answer, just write attendance for 5/7, compromise of 1850. And that emailed to me will give you, excuse me, and this is my regular school email, not the D2L email, will give you credit for your attendance for today. Thank you. Bye.